In 2008, the entire global economy pretty much stared into the abyss. It was a moment of just sheer, absolute panic, driven by incredibly complex finance and, just simple human fear. So let's break down how the world came to a complete and total financial standstill.
This one number tells you almost everything you need to know about September 29th, 2008. The day Congress failed to pass a massive bailout bill, the Dow Jones Industrial Average had its largest single-day point drop in history. The market was in an absolute freefall, and nobody, I mean nobody, knew where the bottom was.
And look, this wasn't just about Wall Street traders losing money. This quote, which came from inside the Treasury Department, shows you just how terrifyingly close we were to a total collapse. We're talking about the plumbing of the global economy, the credit markets that let businesses make payroll, that keep grocery stores stocked. It had all frozen solid. So who were the people trying to fix this mess? Let's take a look at the men in the room, the trio that was suddenly tasked with preventing a second Great Depression. It was a really interesting group. First, you had Hank Paulson, the Treasury Secretary. He was the former CEO of Goldman Sachs, the ultimate Wall Street insider, the dealmaker. Then there was Ben Bernanke, the Fed chairman. He was the academic, a guy who'd spent his entire life studying the Great Depression. And finally, you had Tim Geithner, the New York Fed president, a career crisis fighter who had battled financial panics all over the globe. Their skills were about to be put to the ultimate test. So to really get how we ended up on the brink, we've got to rewind a bit. Because the roots of this whole crisis, they weren't in the stock market. Nope. They were in the U.S. housing market. What started as the American dream was about to become a global nightmare. And here is the core idea you have to understand. There was this huge psychological shift in America. For decades, there was this belief, this ironclad belief, that U.S. house prices could never go down on a national level. And that belief turned housing from just, shelter into this can't-miss speculative investment. It was like a stock you could live in, and it fueled a bubble of historic size. And, of course, Wall Street found a way to pour gasoline on this fire. They invented this thing called a mortgage-backed security. The idea seemed kind of smart at first. Instead of one bank holding one risky mortgage, why not bundle thousands of them together, slice them up, and sell those slices to investors all around the world? Spreading the risk, right? What could go wrong? Well, here's how it worked. This was the food chain. Step 1. Lenders started giving out incredibly risky loans. Some were even called liar loans because you literally didn't have to prove you had an income. Step 2, Wall Street banks would buy up these garbage mortgages, package them together, get a ratings agency to stamp them as super safe, and then, step 3, they'd sell them to pension funds and banks from Berlin to Beijing. Everybody in the chain took a nice little fee, and nobody was left holding the actual risk. Or so they thought. So why? Why did everyone keep doing this? Well, this infamous quote from the CEO of Citigroup at the time, it just captures the mentality perfectly. All the banks knew the risks were getting bigger and bigger, but the profits were so insane that no CEO could afford to be the one to stop the party. The pressure to just keep dancing was immense. And then, in 2007, the music stopped. House prices, for the first time in forever, started to fall. All those supposedly safe financial products that were built on a mountain of bad mortgages, they started to crumble. And the dominoes began to fall. The first real tremor hit in March 2008. The investment bank Bear Stearns just completely collapsed. The government had to step in and arrange this last-minute rescue, which sparked this huge debate about moral hazard, bailing out companies that make bad bets. Then, just a few months later, the government had to take over Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. The two absolute giants at the heart of the U.S. housing market. The system was clearly visibly cracking. And then came September. Just look at this timeline. It shows how unbelievably fast the whole system fell apart. In just a few weeks, we went from nationalizing Fannie and Freddie to letting the investment bank Lehman Brothers completely fail to a massive bailout for the world's biggest insurer, AIG, only to have the ultimate rescue plan get shot down by Congress. It was just pure accelerating chaos. Now, the decision to let Lehman Brothers go bankrupt, that was a huge turning point. Regulators had taken so much heat for the Bear Stearns bailout, so this time they wanted to draw a line in the sand. They declared there would be no government money. They were trying to teach Wall Street a lesson about reckless behavior. Well, that lesson backfired spectacularly.
The consequence was immediate. Just one day later, the government had to do a complete 180 and pump an unbelievable $85 billion into the insurance giant AIG. Why? Because AIG was connected to everyone. They had insured trillions of dollars of assets for banks all over the world. If AIG went down, the entire global system went down with it. It was, simply put, too interconnected to fail. So, with the system in full-on cardiac arrest, Paulson, Bernanke, and Geithner went to Congress with this desperate last-ditch plan. It was called the Troubled Asset Relief Program, or TARP, and it would become one of the most controversial pieces of legislation in American history. They asked for $700 billion. Now, that number itself was actually part of the strategy. Insiders later said they needed a number that was so huge it would shock the markets into feeling confident again. But, and this is a great detail, they specifically avoided asking for $1 trillion because they were afraid that the letter T would be too politically toxic for Congress to even consider. And the debate was immediate, and it was fierce. On one side, you had officials warning this was an economic Pearl Harbor, that we were about to enter a second Great Depression. But on the other side, you had the public and politicians from both parties just absolutely enraged. They saw it as a bailout for the Wall Street fat cats who caused the whole problem. It felt like rewarding failure on a scale that was just impossible to imagine.
And if you want to know what the mood in the country was like, this quote from a congressional aide just says it all. The phone lines on Capitol Hill were literally melting down with furious voters. The opposition wasn't just political, it was visceral. People were beyond outraged.
And that outrage had real consequences. On September 29th, the House of Representatives voted no. They rejected the bailout. And the shock was instant. As lawmakers were still voting, the stock market went into that 777-point nosedive we saw at the very beginning. The panic was now absolute. Now, the government scrambled, they twisted arms, and eventually, a few days later, they did pass the bill. But the damage, and I'm not just talking about to the economy, but to the public's trust in its most basic institutions, that damage was already done, and it would reshape our world for years to come. And here's the wild part. From a purely financial point of view, the bailout worked. The panic stopped, the financial system was pulled back from the brink, and eventually taxpayers got every single penny back and then some. They actually made a profit. By the numbers, it was a success. But that's not how people saw it, and this quote gets to the very heart of the crisis's legacy. The policymakers, they truly believed they saved the country from an economic catastrophe. But the public, they saw something completely different. They saw their government using their tax dollars to save the very bankers who had gambled away the economy. That disconnect created this wound that has never really healed. And you can draw a perfectly straight line from that anger to the major political movements of the next decade. That anti-government, anti-bailout fury, it fueled the rise of the Tea Party on the right. That frustration with inequality and the power of the banks, it fueled Occupy Wall Street on the left. And you can argue that both of those populist currents eventually led to the political earthquake of 2016. So, what's the takeaway? The actions taken in 2008 almost certainly stopped a full-blown depression. The system was saved. But that very act of saving it forces us to ask this final, really crucial question. Did saving the economy cost us our trust in it? And that's a cost we are all still paying today.